Welcome to the Year of No Gear podcast. My name's Ash Tucker and I am a self-confessed guitar gear addict. Over the years, I've bought and sold hundreds of guitars, amps and pedals and discovered it related to a decline in my own mental health. With this as my journal, I've resolved to buy nothing for 365 days and monitor my mood, reactions and habits. My aim is to create a community that shares tips to combat gear acquisition, talk about musicians' mental health, and help us get back to enjoying playing and creation of music. Alright, hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Year of No Gear. We're on episode 17 and I'm very happy to say today my guest is Adam Nolly Getgood. Adam, how are you doing, man? Thank you for doing this.
I'm doing really well, thank you, Ash. It's a pleasure. Really looking forward to chatting.
Oh man, dude, it's so great that you've come on because so we met a couple of weeks ago when you bought an old guitar off of me. My old Les Paul is now firmly in your camp, and and having listened to the podcast, I was really happy to hear that you got something out of the chat that I was having with Leon and various other people. Because I think it's really great to just hear somebody having the same issues with gear at a level that you're working at,
Yeah, I just think it's a really interesting conversation to have, and especially now with COVID, we're not out there chatting to our mates as much about what's going on. We don't get to kind of have that social aspect and talk about our obsession with guitars and gear face to face. So it's just cool to share that kind of thing.
For sure.
And listening to your other conversations, I just thought I've kind of got a slightly different situation. That I'm not a working player, and there's definitely all sorts of things I've thought about gas, like just trying to self-diagnose, and there's ways that I kind of tell myself that it's okay, and I'm not sure that they're necessarily valid, so I thought we could explore that together.
That would be great. I would love that. I would absolutely love that. So let's dive straight in. How this is probably a weird question to ask when you're surrounded by stuff, but how is your relationship with buying gear? How do you feel about it? Do you feel like you've got a control over it? Do you feel like it spins out? How do you feel?
I feel like I'm a bit of an addict that has quite a persuasive way of validating it. Like, essentially, because I work as a producer first and foremost, and also because I work in kind of musical product design as well. I kind of feel like a really big part of my job, and something that's really paid off throughout my career, is having knowledge of musical equipment of all ranges, and not just kind of on paper knowledge, like reading on forums or magazines or whatever, but actually having hands-on experience of every kinds of guitar you can imagine, all different kinds of amps and speakers, especially speakers. Cabs has been my big obsession for the last couple of years, and also just having a collection of those has been really useful too when I'm working as a producer. So I definitely feel like I spend way too much of my income on musical equipment, and sometimes I buy something that I'm super excited about and it arrives and I barely touch it. And I feel pretty guilty about that. But at the same time, it all kind of goes into this kind of interesting cauldron of my musical experience and my knowledge of the gear, which then does seem to pay off. So I don't really know if I'm just justifying something.
No, I don't think so. I do think one of the people that may, or the kind of people who may have a bit of a get out clause of this stuff is people like yourself, studios, producers and things like that. Just before I carry on, Adam, just in case anyone doesn't know kind of what you're up to and what you do as a job, could you just explain a little bit about your career for the audience?
Yeah. So, right now, I'm working primarily as a record producer, or more than that, as a mixing engineer. So I've kind of gradually been reducing the amount of time I spend in the studio recording with clients, and I tend to just work from home where I'm sitting right now. I'm in front of my mixing desk. And I get sent files and I mix them and hopefully make them sound good and the clients are happy, and then move on to the next project. On top of that, I have a company called Getgood Drums where we do mainly drum instrument software, so sampled drums that you can then play back and use as like a virtual instrument. We've also got a few products that are more in the guitar realm or kind of pro audio realm, all software though. And then historically, I think a lot of people would probably know me through my association with the band Periphery. I played in Periphery for, I've never actually tried to think about how many years it is. I think it's 5 or 6 years I played with Periphery. I actually played as a bassist with Periphery, despite the fact that I've kind of been a guitarist since about the age of 14. there was an opportunity to join as a bassist, and I took it and had a really great time playing with them. And I also play guitar kind of behind the scenes on their records a little bit, and continued to play guitar in general. Um, and yeah, I guess that's kind of it. So I kind of transitioned from being a performer. I transitioned from studying guitar actually at BIM. Did you go to BIM, or were you associated
I
with BIM
wasn't.
at all?
I went to Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, but a lot of my friends and people who I work with in the area were BIM students, ACM, ICMP. I spent a bit of time at there was a guitar festival called the IGF, which is how I got to know some of our other guests because they were all like ICMP, BIM tutors visiting the campus for a week. So I had a little bit of the experience of what that's like, but not not the time necessarily. But a lot of our interviewees have all gone through that system of BIM and places
Cool.
like that. But yeah, it's great school, great school.
Yeah, it's cool. So I went to BIM Bristol actually the first year that it opened,
Oh,
and
nice.
so I was taught by our mutual friend Johnny Scaramanga, who
Oh,
put us in
that's
touch in the first place.
I
And
didn't know that. See, I thought you guys had met out and about while playing or anything like that. But yes, I mean Johnny's a great teacher. I had him for a few years as well. So that's okay. So there's the link. I like that.
there's
Okay.
not as cool as us both being rock stars together now
Ah,
as
well,
the lowly underdog, but
there's time.
no. So yeah, I did that guitar, then quickly started touring with Periphery on bass. Discovered a real love for record production through working with the Periphery, and I definitely got like a leg up just through the visibility of the band that I was in, and the fact that I hadn't had access to our peers, and kind of started working for bands probably before I had the experience and know how to do so, just because I had the connection. So it was a really lucky step for me, and
Mm.
forced me to really up my game quickly. And I found that I loved that so much that I was kind of developing the production side of things while we were on tour. And then about what would it be now? Like 5 years ago, yeah, about 5 years ago, I made the decision to stop touring with Periphery. We were quite happy with this kind of free arrangement that I was still technically a member of the band, but wasn't on tour with them. And then
Mm.
after a year of that, I was like, you know what, guys, this isn't fair to either of us. I'm doing my thing, you guys are doing your own thing, and we just have this weird label that I'm still in the band, but in reality, I'm not involved in anything. And we should just come out and say that I'm not in the band anymore. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
Um,
But you're happy, all the
so
happier for it now because, like you know, like you said, you got more time at home. You've got a partner as well to think about. So you know you're spending time with her, and you've got the whole thing with yeah, you've got work at home to be doing as well. I think people underestimate sometimes. It's a bit of a dream for us all to be touring around and doing stuff all the time, but it's a lot. It takes you away for long periods of time. It's hard to hold things down, and I'm like you. I'm a bit of a homebird. I do like my space in my area, or even like a social life. I do quite like a trip out to the pub on a Saturday night, and that's been gone for, well, it was gone before I took a break. It was gone for years and years and years. So
cool.
you know, it does happen. I totally
Yeah, it
understand that.
does.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's one of those things that most people that get into bands and touring, they start quite young, or around the age maybe of going to university or just after university. So, I mean, from my experience, I didn't really have the experience of living as an adult and not being a student. I just kind of went straight from studying at BIM,
Mm.
which I mean, it's not like studying at Oxford or Cambridge or something like that. There's quite a lot of social life to be had, but you're a broke student essentially.
Yeah.
I went straight from that to kind of spending most of my time out of the country, so it didn't make sense to have my own place in the UK, and I think I just felt a bit stateless as a
Mm.
person, and quite a lot of things coalesced. I met my then future wife, my wife, and I'd been having all these thoughts about wanting to do production, and I think I'm kind of an introverted person, and I don't think I'm necessarily the personality type that super thrives on tour. So
Mm.
um, all of those things kind of together just coalesced, and I was like,
But that's
I
it.
want I want the experience of being an adult and having a place and
Of
being with my
course.
wife and doing production.
Well, it leads you. Yeah, it leads you to where you are now, which I'm sure you're all the happier for it. So your gear acquisition, do you find it worse with guitars, amps, or pedals? Is there one area you find it loses its it gets most out of control?
I'd say for the last 12 months, speakers has been my
Mm.
my thing. Well,
I
actually, like cabinets or speakers,
It's
like
been really interesting what people quite often go outside that bracket. I think when I spoke to Johnny as well, it was pickups, and it's
right.
really interesting. People do get down to rabbit holes with things like this. So what is about speakers? Just trying different things out and just having an access to them, or trying to find out what works for you, or what led you into speakers.
Yeah. I think the first thing was to really define what works for me. And then the second was to have the experience of all of the classic types of speakers, and then some of the oddball ones and like the boutique versions of classic speakers and stuff like that. But what fascinates me about speakers, even more so than cabs, is they really are the filter that our guitar tone goes through. And I think that the more gain you use, the more crucial that becomes, because, like a really distorted guitar signal is just all of the frequencies all the time being shoved through this really crazy filter.
I do apologize. That was my phone.
I wasn't even.
No, it's okay. That's all right. Carry on. Sorry, I'm still listening.
Cool. So yeah, high gain tone through a speaker is like you hear all of this really weird kind of peaks and valleys of the frequency response of the speaker, and it totally defines the kind of EQ of your guitar sound. And they're all different. Every speaker that comes off the line sounds different to the one that's next to it, because they're made out of this just like paper pulp. It's such a random, dated, really way of making tones that nobody uses that kind of technology to build anything hi-fi now. It's just that guitarists have got used to that sound. And I got really obsessed with the vintage 30 specifically, which, ostensibly has not ever changed since its release, but yet different batches and different eras sound hugely different.
Really? That's interesting. I know people who are very. I'm a fan of a greenback personally,
right?
But I know a lot of people who are exactly the same about greenbacks. They go like the Chinese ones and the British made ones just sound completely different, and then you get like heritage greenbacks and things like that, and it all goes into this just stew of there's so much to look into. And I completely agree with you. While we're on this, I have a theory, and I'd be interested to know how you feel about this. But I think to a point, the more gain that's on a guitar sound, the less the guitar holds back a good sound a little bit. So prime example, if I know quite a lot of people who do the Tom DeLonge Strat thing, where they'll throw a JB into a bridge pickup of a Strat, and anytime I've heard somebody do that in a guitar of any quality, whether it's less good or more good, it kind of moves the impetus to that guitar matters less than the thing you're going through and the speaker. You can tell me if I'm completely wrong. My knowledge of high gain sounds is completely, limited, but that's my experience. How do you feel about that? Do you still feel the guitar is quite imperative to that noise when it gets into high gain levels, or do you think it's more on the amp and the speakers?
I think it would be a lie to say that the guitar is the most crucial thing at all in that situation. But I do think that the more specialized your ear becomes, like the more interested in high gain sounds you are, the more those admittedly small differences matter to you, like the quality of the pick attack, and that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I take what you say, because you're not really hearing the dynamics of the pickup as much.
Sure.
You're not really hearing, so much. Like a high gain amp has got such a filtered front end that it takes off so much top and bottom end, so it doesn't get fuzzy or twangy sounding. So you lose wide spectrum of the guitar signal. But what remains to people that are high gain tone enthusiasts is super important.
Sure.
And there's just certain amps and cabs that work really well, and if you've got one of those and you've had it for a while, then you'll probably still be obsessed with finding the right pickup and the right guitar.
Of course, yeah. That's it. I guess, if your amp and cab is what you always use, then the guitar's the only thing changing, right? So that's going to be, you are going to hear those differences.
Yeah. But I think to an outsider, definitely, if you heard a recording of a guitar, and then the recording, like a high gain tone guitar recording, and then the same signal chain with a different pickup in there. Unless you're listening to that day in, day out, the difference you'd probably think was negligible. And it probably is negligible, but to us that really care about it, like the feel and just those tiny details really do matter.
That does, that totally makes sense. Speakers. So are there specific times when you find that you're buying and selling? Are you more of a buyer or a seller first? Actually, that's a good question. Do you sell quite a lot?
Hoarder. I don't
You're
sell.
A hoarder. You don't sell.
Yeah.
So,
but I've gotten into trading recently. I really like trading.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah, we had that conversation. Yeah, there was. I did have to think about that AC30 you offered me, because I did have a second where I thought, oh man, I would
I
love
actually
them.
traded it for the Super Lead you can see back there.
Oh, no,
I,
that's a good
maybe you
deal.
can see it. I don't know if it's behind the
No,
microphone.
that is a good deal.
So,
But do you find that you're okay? Do you find that you're trading or you're buying gets? Is there times when you find it's worse? So, for example, if you've got like a deadline looming or you've hit a wall, do you tend to go on it there, or do you find it's better when you're productive, when you're doing things? Like, have you noticed any patterns?
yeah, I have. I definitely think, and I've heard you talking about this in the past, and I've heard other people talking about it. I definitely think it corresponds to periods of lower life satisfaction, if you
Mm-hmm.
want, or work satisfaction. I'm not sure if it is a result or it is actually part of that cycle. I think it is kind of part of that generation of kind of discontent. Um, I've also done some projects. We were talking before we went on air how with COVID I've been undertaking certain recording, sampling, and kind of impulse capturing
Mm-hmm.
um, projects for my company just on my own that typically would have had multiple people to take care of, or I might not have even been involved in the capturing process of in the past. And some of those are really, really repetitive and monotonous and long-winded. There's one which I've been working on for 3 months and I'm not even halfway through it. It's not been like every day. I've had to kind of eke it out over time, otherwise I'd have gone crazy. But when you're just sitting there in silence, waiting for an instrument to decay for 40 seconds, and then you hit it again, and then you wait. I've
Just the thought
literally,
of that's making me wince a little bit. I'm right there with you.
yeah,
I understand.
and we're talking about hours and hours. I mean, like by the end, it's going to be probably a week's worth of audio just straight.
Mm.
So um, you quite quickly get bored, and you're watching Netflix or you listen to a podcast on headphones or something, and then you start scrolling Facebook Marketplace or eBay or something like that, and the number of unnecessary purchases. I mean, look at me trying to justify it. I was even trying to worm my way out of calling it unnecessary, but yeah, unnecessary purchases that go on just because you're just bored and you're just scrolling and you're on Marketplace and you're like, oh my god, that's a ridiculous deal for
Yeah,
something that you previously had no interest in.
especially in
Uh,
COVID like time, marketplace has been, for lack of a better word, amazing. There has just been so many people who are clearly in financial trouble or who are struggling and they need to get money fast. But I've seen a few things crop up where I've just like you, I've just gone, that's a ridiculous deal. And if I was in any other career, if music wasn't my career and I didn't have work, I would absolutely not have thought twice about it. I would have just jumped. But you're right. Yeah, you do just scroll and you get bored and you find your way through. How do you have ways of talking yourself out of it? Like, what I'm interested. Do you just go for it, or do you have
I have no
techniques?
self-control.
No, so
I just
I don't
if I
think
can
many of us do.
justify it in some tiny way, even like, oh, I wonder what that sounds like. I should store that in my Toad encyclopedia kind of
Mm.
thing.
But yeah, if you, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. But again, I think something that I always want to sort of make clear about why this podcast exists, and I hope it comes across, is that I'm not kicking off at people who are spending their money on their equipment. It's not that at all. I think really the reason this exists is I can remember points in my life where I would get to where I'd go, wow, the purchases were so regular that it was like I need to stop, but I can't seem to dig my way out of the hole, if that makes sense. I'm just on this endless, this endless thing. It's not in any way a dig at people getting involved in it. I just think, I really think sometimes mates break me out of it. Have you had this where you talk to your friends and I'll go and say, oh, I really want this thing's come up. How great is that? And I've had friends come up to me and go, you don't really need it though, do you? Like for what you do and what you're getting done, you don't really need it. And then it turns into, well, I want it though. And then you have that conversation. Have you got any mates that do that for you, or do you just endlessly, do you just
Yeah.
find your stuff?
I mean, I have a great friendship circle, but a lot of them are producers as
So
well,
they'll
or
just go,
very
oh mate, just
familiar
do
with
it.
that
Just get
world.
it.
And like compared to some of the people that I know, admittedly, maybe they're not my closest friends, but there's people I know that are into pro audio stuff that are just
Mm.
dropping, five figures monthly on stuff, or just trading incessantly on things which don't really interest me too much. I wanted to go back to one thing you said
Oh
actually,
yeah,
which is a
sure. Yeah,
theory I
go
have
on. Yeah.
about COVID and people having to sell their equipment. I actually have a theory that people that are serious musicians doing a lot of buying of new equipment during COVID.
Mm.
I'm not sure if you're connected to many people in like the music industry sales world, but Fender has posted their
Yeah,
largest
I
increase
did see that. Yeah,
of all
they've had
time.
Fender have had their largest increase in sales for, is it on record?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, and that's the case honestly with a lot of companies that I
Mm.
know of that just can't keep stock in. They're just selling as fast as they can. And I think I have a theory that so many people at home are on YouTube looking at channels of people talking about the new greatest gear. They're on social media and they're getting targeted ads. I think a lot of the things that we're seeing on Facebook Marketplace are people having just made a large purchase,
Mm.
brand new, and need to sell something else afterwards to kind of make up for it.
That's interesting. I didn't ever think of that. That's a really valid point. Yeah, like just trying to move some stuff away and recoup funds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's really going to be interesting. I mean, the guitar's always been present, but I am going to be interested to see how present the guitar is in the music industry across all genres after COVID starts to ease. Because with all these people buying guitars, obviously there's going to be more people hopefully creating with guitars, and therefore over the coming years, I hope to see it have a little bit of a resurgence, even in mainstream music, or just get some really cool music out of it. That would be
That's
great.
interesting because the kind of music I'm into, guitars and drums are the two
It's
most
present, yeah.
kind of important instruments, and there's absolutely zero sign of those slowing down.
Yeah,
So it's interesting to hear your perspective, kind of from outside the heavy music world. Have you kind of noticed a real
I
reduction in
I
kind of?
find I find there's a real punch forward for keyboards right now, and sound sculptures. Like especially if I'm looking in the pop world and I'm looking at. I mean, we still have acoustic guitar, right? Like you've still got your Ed Sheerans, your Taylor Swifts, all of that. They're still kind of championing that, but the the pop world and various other, I guess blues is quite a guitar led area, but it's getting very there's always keyboard samples, there's always, because people are doing things on their computers, drums are quite often programmed. Again, there's nothing wrong with any of that, um but the guitar is like as a mainstay instrument. I'm finding you hear a lot more acoustic guitar and synths than you're finding of the electric guitar, and when people really work with electric guitar, you can get some really incredible sounds out of it. I think I'm talking about, to a point, top 40. I'd like to hear a little bit more of it in top 40 music. I'd also just generally like to hear it used, maybe more in hip hop and soul, soul stuff as well. Like there's a lot of soul records out where the guitar is so low down in the mix that you're really digging for it when you've got to cover stuff. So yeah, it really depends. We've got our first question here, dude. I'm just gonna ask you this. So James Arbery asks, if you've bought something that nearly does what you're after, do you consider modding it rather than looking for something new?
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely do. So I'm going to shoehorn an answer that I wanted to give during this podcast into the format of this question.
No, go
So
for it.
I heard you talking on one of the podcasts that I heard that you'd done um, about, well, there was just a hint of this idea of buying new gear but not learning what it can do,
Yes.
and that's something that I really try to not do. Like I think I'm there's a part of me, the kind of engineering part of my brain, that wants to understand why things sound the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely kind of went down the train of, for example, buying all of the boutique high gain amplifiers that you see being talked about. And I just got sick of like, yeah, you buy an amp, it could be like 3 grand, it could be more. I mean, it could be
Mm.
less too, but you get a diesel or something like that. And you're like, oh, this is so great. I just wish it was like a tiny bit tighter, or it just did this tiny bit more of this other thing, and then it doesn't do it. So you buy another amp of a similar kind of value, hoping for this like 1% change that you'd wanted, but of course it's totally different because it's designed by a different person. And like off the back of that, I was like, geez, okay, I'm just going to learn to read circuit diagrams. So I started to do that and like start getting schematics of all my amps and looking at the schematics of the amps which sounded great, and being like, okay, here's some common threads. Like when the preamp filtering is this way, and when these things are done this way, and the tone stack is this type, I really like it. So
Mm.
let's look at this amp that's nearly there, and what's going on with the schematic. Oh yeah, I can see it's kind of it's different in this way. Well, if I modify it, so I started modifying my amp, so like
Right.
changing the tone stacks and changing the way the gain's filtered and the amount of gain, and that was like it was such a great exercise. It was so useful to me in my career, but also just so great to not be just kind of a slave to what's on the market, but
Mm-hmm.
actually know how to then refine it to what you like. Um, and then there's modifications like changing pickups and stuff like that. But I think some of the best things you can do on your guitar, if it's not making the sound you want, is like mess with the action and mess with the pickup height.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the difference between a guitar with an action at like 1.2 mil at the 12th fret versus 1.4,
Mm-hmm.
which as a player you can feel it. I mean, I think it's mind blowing how our fingers can sense those kinds of differences, but we can feel it. It does feel like the action's a bit higher. When the guitar's ringing out and it's not buzzing and the notes are super clear, suddenly like that guitar sounds amazing and you don't need to change the pickup in it anymore.
No.
You move the pickup a bit closer to the string so it's got the output that you want and it sounds fuller. And now you've got a guitar which a second ago you weren't liking, and now it's like so completely satisfying to listen to.
You're so right with that. Even pickup height. You look at like or magnet height. I did that. Like you look at like an example of something like a P90 or a humbucker where you've got screw coils, and I've known so many people where they've gone, oh, I really want it to sound a bit thicker on the low end, so I went up on strings, but but now it's too woofy and I can't find that middle ground. And you go, just adjust the screws, man. Like, or I wish there was more of the, like, I wish there was more high end. I wish it was sparklier. And I'm just a tiny little turn of those screws on those pickups will do it. And you're right, action as well. Like the lower, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the lower I find the action is, the kind of the spittier it sounds, like a bit more direct. And then the higher it kind of sags a bit and gives you a little bit more give. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And how interesting that you went into modding as well. I'm a big fan of the Boss Blues driver, which on the surface is a very basic pedal, but I had the same thing done. I had somebody mod it to a way, and they knew sort of what I was liking and what I was going, and they, oh, just give me that. And they did a little mess about with it, and it's never left my pedal board, and it's a, what, 40 quid pedal. It's
Yeah.
when you know what you're doing, and they're so close as well. I mean, you don't have to tell me any companies that you found out, but I'm sure you've looked at some amp schematics and then looked at something you're going for, and then you've gone, well, this is exactly the same minus one or two components or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. And it can be the value of one component will on something, especially something which is like kind of filtering the signal near the beginning. Like I don't know if it depends on what you're listening to, but yeah, like on a Fender amp, for example, if you've got trying to think of something which would relate more to the kind of blues world, like if you play something like a Fender Tremolux,
Yeah.
like a head with a separate cab, it's designed to go into a closed back cab, right? So Fender changed the value of one thing in the power section to reduce the amount of low end, so it didn't get too boomy with the closed back cab.
Right.
And that one thing changes the whole feel of the amp. It doesn't kind of fart out on the low strings. You can push it that much harder and it doesn't kind of crumble away. And it's literally one component. And then you compare it to all the other blackface amps, let's say, and they're all the same circuit with just tiny modifications, maybe different power tubes or something like that. And oh god, this is going to turn into a rant. But people market amps based on the power tube they have, and that to me is like one of the least consequential parts of an amp. Everyone goes like, oh, British amp, EL34, and that's suddenly like, for some reason, that power tube has now defined that sound. But the reality is you could change power tubes all day in a Marshall circuit, and it's always going to sound like a Marshall. It's never going to have that American sound if you put 6L6s in it. Those differences happen way earlier in the signal chain, and they are so easily changed. And when I say I'm modding amps, I'm not adding extra tubes for extra gain or doing like crazy stuff like the kind of 80s Marshall modder guys would do, add like diode clipping and things like that. I'm just talking about switching component values.
Yeah. Some people
what's
clip
ready.
them out. Some people clip them out, don't they, as well? I've seen some people who've gone into like JCM 800s and they always go, oh, there's just this one cap on the power sec or on this section, just clip that out and it instantly sounds better. I've seen that a lot, but yeah, they are tiny moves. No, I think that's really interesting to hear. Like, and I think a lot of people, I agree with you. Again, whether it's capacitors, whether it's cabinets, whether it's if you're recording, I'm sure like microphones make a difference as well. Like there's so many variables that it almost becomes. I'm interested actually. At what point do you change the amp? Because like you said, you've got all those options of modding stuff, and you've got the options of microphones and miking techniques and things like that. At what point does the amp change become necessary for you to change the sound? How much could you work with one amp with the techniques that you know and get most sounds you need without having to change an amp over?
A lot, especially if you've got some boost pedals or something like that. Like I think if you had, say, a JCM 800, you could do pretty much any kind of gig ever with that, including funk, including blues, including the heaviest metal if you've got a pedal to go in front of it. You could totally do that. There's nothing that's going to restrict you about the amp if you know how to work it and you've got an appropriate cabinet and miking set up for that. Is it necessarily going to be the best for all of those things? Maybe not, but I bet no one in the audience is going to care. And you could get it to feel really good.
Yeah.
Like you could get a JCM 800 pushed clean sound that would make a blues guitarist super happy. If you know how to work those controls, and you know how to work with, like, say, the bright cap, the one you're referring to on a JCM 800, which is just this thing where the lower the gain is, the brighter the sound is, and as you turn it up, it gets thicker and thicker, and it's kind of a really arbitrary decision that they put it in there. I mean, they did have a reason for doing it, but it so defines the character of that amp and your experience of that amp depending on where that's set. So I really think that amps, while they're one of the most important things as far as player feel is concerned, in terms of the actual sonic landscape, like the sound of the guitar in a recording, it's one of the smallest factors, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, thank you, James, for that question. If anyone else has got any questions, please do just drop it in the comments, and we will get through them, I'm sure. So
I'm sorry, James, for taking your question and just using it to
no,
get on my
I'm sure he doesn't mind. To be fair, I think that's a really great truth. Just getting to know your amp, getting to really, So yeah, guys, look at circuit diagrams. Maybe that will be the answer. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about you again, dude, because I want to have a conversation about your best and worst gear you've bought. So okay. What would you say is the best thing you've ever bought, the thing you've got the most mileage out of? You'd buy it again in a second if you could. Like, what is that to you?
Oh God, I don't know. So, I mean, because of what I do, I think this would be easier to answer if I was a player in a band that kind of had my sound.
Sure.
But I think
you can say a bit of pro audio gear if you want. You can say like a preamp or something if you use it every day. That's totally fair enough.
Don't get me started on preamps, mate. That's huge. That's a huge hole there. No, I'll say in recent times, something that fulfilled a tone that I've had in my head since I started playing guitar, because of the music that I was listening to, is I got a Mesa Boogie 412. Now, not any Mesa Boogie 412. I actually bought 14 Mesa Boogie 412s over the space of about 6 months.
Wow.
All of them with vintage 30s from different eras. And I finally got a cab that is the one. And you believe me, I'm not just being really, really anal here. Like, they sound hugely different.
I don't disagree with you, because I've had a similar thing with I know what you're saying about cabinet, even what they're made out of. Like, it just makes such a difference. I've tried Marshall cabs, have been like that for me. I've tried some Marshall cabs that have been amazing, and then I've tried some that have just sounded like trash. So yeah. I completely get. So what is it about this one that makes it better than the other? Just the sound of it, or was it built a certain way?
It's the sound of it. They're pretty much all built the same way. I mean, they changed very early on in the early 90s, and then around 2000 they made a change which recessed the handles and a couple of other things, which I don't really think they affected the construction of the cab very much. I think the cabinet itself is a really great design for recording. It's a very thick cabinet, but it's got enough give in it that the mids are still there. It's quite directional in the room, so it's not necessarily the best playing experience. But it's this particular quad of vintage 30s that come from a particular era, which I've later learned, and been able to verify it with somebody that's in the know, that there was a kind of transition period in one aspect of the manufacturer, actually across all of the Celestion speakers. And there was a point where things went in a direction that they weren't expecting, and they quickly changed because they weren't happy with the sound. But actually, that tiny window where the speakers were coming out not entirely as intended, they were coming out really quite dark sounding. And it just so happens that to me, that is the most glorious sounding quad of speakers I've ever heard. And I managed to track down another quad of speakers from that same era that came out of a Mesa cab, and I managed to convince the guy to sell me the speakers and not the cabinet because I'm running out of space here.
Nice.
And those have the same sound. They're particularly dark, and it's around 2001 that it happened. And it's not like a modern V30 at all, which I don't think sound bad, but by comparison, they're a lot shoutier and like more upper mid-rangey. These speakers are really smooth and thick and dark. You could use them for, all the classic styles if you wanted to, but with high gain, it just stops things from being fizzy. They kind of got just the right amount of bite, and then the frequencies tail off quite abruptly, and you don't get that fizz on the top.
Which I guess is something you like with some metal tones you may come into quite a lot, right? Because forgive me for my ignorance, but you kind of, if you're going for scooped sounds, then you're going to quite often have the issue of too much high end or too much low end. And I'm sort of estimating that probably the too much high end is probably a more likely issue that you come to, which doesn't necessarily make it wrong. Our ears like high end, but I guess when you're mixing somebody, you'd rather the speakers take a high sound and pull it back, and then you can put the high end back in on the amp, as opposed to doing it the other way around, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit that way. And just the fact that speakers are so, if you see the EQ that a speaker imparts, it's like this crazy jagged line throughout the top end, and it's like a fingerprint or a snowflake or something like that, all unique and different. And certain ones just hit our ear in a way that seems more pleasing, and you can't just EQ that with like a general high frequency lift or cut, and these just have that perfect snowflake character.
That's great. That's fair enough. Well, I'm glad you found it. I'm glad you found.
Yeah, me too. I'm super glad.
Took you 14 cabs to find it. Well done.
So if anyone wants to buy a Mesa Boogie cab, well, those are great sounding ones. Well, I'm dead serious.
I'm sure. Yeah. No. I'm sure. Well, there you go. There's the message out. If anyone is after a Mesa Boogie 412, your neighbours will love you, but you'll be happier than them. So who cares? So that was your best gear. What about your worst gear? What was the biggest waste of money?
Biggest waste of money. Oh yeah, I've got a good one.
Go on.
This is a modified amp. It's a modified JCM 800, modified by this guy Mark Cameron, who was all the rage on the forums about 10 years ago, and it kind of just exploded into a mess because he didn't deliver people's amps on time, and there was all sorts of drama. But he was being heralded as the second coming of amp Jesus, basically. And I managed to get one of his amps. I actually bought it for myself for my birthday 3 years ago, at great expense. So he's based in the States. Very few of them have made their way over to the UK. And I plugged it in, and just straight away I knew it wasn't for me. It was just not my kind of sound at all. It's like, for me, it's a bit just harsh, and it's got way too much gain. And I wouldn't even care if it hadn't been so expensive. Thankfully, that is one thing which I'm going to try and sell or trade away, because I'm sure it's going to be what somebody wants.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just it was such a huge disappointment compared to what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I've had a few. Do you ever find there's stuff out there where people kind of herald it as like the greatest thing? Do you always go into those situations with a little bit of reserved nature, like when somebody says that, or do you dive straight in and try and go, well, this could, I'll try it if it's, because I personally have that a little bit with some amps where there are some great amps out there, but I also, as a live guy, I would rather my floor was lower. So prime example, I always talk about matchless amps, because I am an obsessive. I think they're probably the best sounding thing I've heard. However, I don't really have a desire to own one, because I know I quite like the sound of my AC30 head, and it's not better. It's completely different. It's, but I wouldn't want to love the sound of that matchless amp and then not be able to go back to the cheaper stuff. Do you have a
Yeah.
similar thing where you go, how much better is law of diminishing returns, like anything like that? Or do you just fire in and
I think
just
it
try it?
really depends on who I'm hearing it from. There's people whose judgment I really trust,
Mm.
and there's a lot of people whose judgment I don't trust because, especially now with the internet, it's so easy for this kind of emperor's new clothes thing to happen where
Mm-hmm.
somebody gets the new piece of gear and they say it's amazing. I've even been involved in that. I've been a part of that going back quite a few years when I used to hang out on forums of kind of just hyping stuff up. And
Yeah.
I recognize I didn't have the experience to make the kind of claims that I was making. And everyone sounds like they've got loads of experience when they're talking in all the hyperbole about something, but you really don't know how good their ear is or what experience of other gear they have is or how they've put stuff through their paces or how applicable their taste is. I mean, if you went on what you saw, especially on forums about 8, 9 years ago when I used to hang around on them a lot, like you think like the Vintage 30 was the worst speaker and
Mm-hmm.
everyone hates it. It's a bit like Nickelback, you know, if you went by internet opinion, you'd think they were the tiniest band that nobody likes. And
Yeah.
then the reality is they're one of the biggest bands on the planet kind of thing.
I mean,
Um,
talking about heavy tones,
yeah.
I will straight up admit that the recording of those records is pretty impressive when
Yeah,
I've
it should
heard
be. I
them.
mean, there's some of the biggest budget rock
Yeah,
records of all
I
time. You
bet.
know?
They do sound great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, that's interesting. So, did you ever find a piece of gear that stopped you buying stuff for a long period of time? Did you ever pick something up where you went, that this has kept me stable for a long period of time and I'm actually not wanted for anything? Because I think we do find this. If, like, for me, it was my Boss MS3 multi effects. It kind of stopped me dead in my tracks buying pedals for a long time. So I'm just interested if you had anything like that.
Yeah, I think I can give two answers. So the first one's actually not in the world of guitar, it's in the world of bass. When I started playing bass for Periphery, they asked me to join, and I was like, I know nothing about the world of bass. I don't know what heavy players use. Or I could just see everyone was playing like essentially like 70-year-old designs, like Fender P basses and J basses and into Ampeg
Mm-hmm.
amps. And I was like, it's a bit weird in this modern metal world where there's all these new requirements. And I kind of went out on this hunt for what would be a suitable bass. And fairly quickly, I mean, I tried lots of them. I tried Mionas and Warwick basses and Spectres. I thought Spectres were really cool. Then I came across this Canadian company called Dingwall.
Yes, I
And
saw that. You have an affiliation with them, right? I believe I,
too,
I
yeah,
saw the picture. Yeah.
yeah. So they had a model called the Combustion, which they're like a small Canadian custom shop. Well, not custom shop, but like very handmade um, company that were really appealing mainly to like session players and stuff like that. Like Lee Sklar is a famous Dingwall user.
Yeah.
But they've recently launched this bass called the Combustion, which they had partly made in China. Um, and I mean, the guys at Dingwall are super perfectionists, so they really like. I mean, I guess import instruments now have less of a kind of bad connotation, but especially back then, and given the other basses they were making,
Mm.
people were a bit hesitant to go for them because they felt like it was some kind of step back. But those guys really did their diligence and chose like an amazing factory, and they're made to incredibly high specification, and they're still checked over before they get sent out. And I tried one of those, and I was just like, God damn, this is the best sounding, like kind of Fender-ish sounding bass, but it's got this multi-scale thing, so it's got really long strings on the bass side, so you
Right.
can tune it really low, and it's not floppy, and the strings still kind of project, and it kind of sounds like a grand piano almost. So I bought a couple of those to start touring with, and then quite quickly moved into chatting with them, and they agreed to do a signature bass. And the truth is, I mean, I started playing them because they just blew everything else out of the water, and I'm yet to hear a better sounding bass. I mean, I've got my signature model, and I've got quite a few of those. I've also got a couple of the Canadian instruments, and all of them just tick every box in every way that you could possibly imagine. That
Mm.
like I'm not really interested in other basses.
Yeah.
I don't own, actually, I do own one non-Dingwall bass, which I think is really cool, but I wouldn't use it for the kind of music that I play most of the time. And that was it. I was like, cool, that's the sound. That defines the sound. It's perfect that I don't need anything else.
That's
So that's
great.
one answer. And I feel really, I kind of feel like it's super cheesy to talk about a signature model that way. But the truth is it came about because
No,
I was
but
like,
if
this is the best
but
thing.
that's
You
it.
know?
I think a lot of people have that where they look at instruments and they go, this is perfect. If only it was, this couple of things. Like I said, if it, like a signature model, of course, I really am inspired as well by when people release their own signature models and then they feel so strongly about it and so comfortable about it that if they need to on the day of a gig, they will go to a local music shop, pick it up, and play one off the shelf. I believe I saw John Mayer did that with his PRS model. I know Jim Adkins from Jimmy Eat World does a similar thing with his like Korean made Tele thin lines, you know, that, and that's a big thing. I completely get that, especially if you're touring.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I feel about these basses. And I mean, I think there's something to be said too for the quality of instruments that are coming out, like the Chord Factories, for example, over in Korea. They are like, it's not at all like when you and I probably started playing guitar, where there was like this really big differential in quality. Like a PRS SE guitar now,
Yeah,
it's awesome. Like you don't need anything more than that realistically as a player. If you choose the one that's got the kind of layout that you need in terms of pickups, and
I know a few people
like.
who feel that way about the Music Man Sterlings as well. Quite a few people I know have said like, oh, I wouldn't actually buy an American one. I'd just go for a Sterling because I know it will play as well as the American ones. So what's your second answer? I'm intrigued now.
Second answer was the PV5150,
Classic.
which is, you know, you were talking earlier about the cost of items, or you kind of insinuated something about like you didn't want to get into like something that's like a boutique amp, in case it kind of overshadowed your Fox.
Yeah.
And there's definitely something which I've learned, especially through recording, is like it really doesn't matter what the price tag is on it. It's just about how it sounds.
Sure.
And you can try and justify, and I've done it, where you have this new expensive thing and you insist on using it for the recording, and then later you're like, I shouldn't have done that. This is not as good as the cheaper one.
Yeah.
And the 5150 is one of those amps. And
is it a combo or a head?
No, it's a head, and I've actually got three of them. I've got like the original one, which soon after the release has what they call the block letter, where it says EVH on it.
Yeah.
And ElectroVoice sued them, and so they couldn't put that, so they changed it to like his signature script. So I've got one of those, and then I've got the Plus version, which has 2 channels on it.
Right.
Or 2 separate channels. And but again, probably because I was hanging around on forums and stuff, I've thought that the best amps are probably the boutique ones that everyone was going mental for. And like the first decent amp I got for myself was a Diesel VH4, because everyone was saying it was the best thing in the world. In reality, I know now it's more of like a rock amp than a metal amp, really.
Weren't Muse using those for a while? I think I remember Matt Bellamy being a big Diesel guy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess Matt Bellamy, Metallica used them to some extent. Adam Jones from Tool, I think, is a really huge proponent of them. He's got one of the really early ones that he runs with a Marshall Super Bass, and that's kind of been the Tool sound for a long time. So, but basically, I avoided getting a 5150 because it was like, I don't know, it just felt so generic, and it was cheaper, and I thought it had to have been outdone by all these amps that everyone was saying were the best thing in the world. And then it was quite recently, I mean, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago that I finally got a 5150, and I was just like, why didn't I do this? If I'd have just on day one got the gear that I knew was being used on the records that I love the sound of, I'd have been so happy.
Yeah.
But instead I went on like the opinion of all these strangers who are just basically hobbyists and, you know, just buying something really expensive and justifying it to themselves and everyone else they can talk to about it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really cool boutique stuff out there, but you're paying the money for a different reason. You know, you're probably paying the money because it's a small operation, or it's being hand wired, or because it's built, maybe it's built to like a super military spec, like a Soldano or something, where everything is like indestructible, basically. 5150 is definitely not. It's pretty flimsy inside, but it's got the sound.
That's it. If it works, it works. Totally.
Yeah.
We've got another question here, dude. So Freddie Draper asks, hey guys, really enjoying your chat. Nolly, as someone who's toured a lot, constantly adapting to new clients in studios, etc., there must be occasional moments where things need to be done in the 11th hour. Can you recall any unexpected or bizarre last-minute panic gear fix purchases to save the day other than gaffer tape? So I'm guessing that means if you had to have something in your toolkit to get you out, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's quite a few. There's like fixes you can do. I mean, I've definitely been on sessions where myself or the band has just bought an amp or something and had it delivered to the studio, because even though we could have probably blagged one from a friend, it would have taken a few days and we needed to get going or something. And in those minutes, you don't find the bargain. You just end up paying full price for something that you probably, you know, in a different situation would have spent longer over making that decision.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays with the way that recordings are done, especially in the world that I inhabit, there's so many kind of safeguards that people do. So taking a DI on your guitars, and I mean, bass is almost always recorded DI. if it's even recorded these days. A lot of bands are programming their bass in the heavy world. Um, so you've got, you have recourse to recreate sounds after the fact if you need to. Um, yeah, I don't know how to really answer the question. I think I remember being with Periphery and being on our first like major tour with Dream Theater, touring around in Europe, and we were having this computer issue. We were running loads of backing tracks and like all that. We're using Axe effects, which were being switched by MIDI, so
Yeah.
everything was reliant on this computer. And I remember walking out on stage in Finland for the first show, like this gigantic ice hockey arena, and we were opening the set with like most Periphery songs are like 5 minutes long, but there's this one song that's 15 minutes and it's kind of a fan favorite, and we decided to do that. So we walk out on stage, nobody cares about us because we're the opening act to Dream Theater and we just look rubbish on stage and whatever. So we start playing, and within like 1 minute the computer's crashed
Oh
and we've lost
no.
everything. And then we're just standing on stage. We're not allowed to use, of course, the whole stage that Dream Theater have, so we have like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 meters at the front and then gigantic banner behind us. So we're just completely exposed. We've got no lighting, so it's just house lights on. People still coming into the arena, people just having a chat and not really caring at all about us. And we were just waiting on stage for like 15 minutes while our guitarist tried to frantically restart the computer and get it working. And our drummer did like not even one, probably 2 or 3 impromptu drum solos. And I remember just feeling like we were like the most amateur band in the world, and pretty sure within a couple of days we bought just a new laptop. Somebody just went to an Apple store and just bought a new one. And
Right.
it turned out actually that we'd just been unlucky. We got a laptop that had a motherboard issue that later got recalled by Apple. Sorry, a graphics card issue where it would just overheat for no reason. So we were just totally unlucky that we had this non-functioning bit of kit. But yeah, just like, you can't do that. It happened to us a few times, and John Petrucci sat us down with his tour manager and we're like, this can't happen again.
Yeah.
Like, as our support act, you need to be able to put on a decent show. And we're like, all right, we're already broke, but let's go and buy some nice top flight MacBook Pro to not have this happen again.
God. Is John Petrucci nice? He seems
Yeah.
like a very nice man.
Yeah, he's super nice.
Yeah.
It's not like I was hanging out every day. I mean, he's around.
Sure. But I can't, but I mean,
I've
I
only
can't
had
imagine that
conversation.
chat being being a particularly harsh one. I can imagine it being like you said, a sit down and like a listen up, guys. One of those.
Yeah, I mean, it was very nice, and there was nothing threatening about what he said, but the scale of the situation and the opportunity we were in, and coming from someone like him, we were definitely like, we are so unprofessional.
Yeah,
like, we need to fix this now.
I'm sure you guys knew
We've
that.
made Uncle Petrucci sad.
Nice, dude. I really appreciated your time today. I just want to finish up with one more question for you, if that's all right. So I'd just like to know, if you had to recommend a rig for somebody that was working in your field, you can recommend 1 amp, 1 guitar, and up to 3 pedals. You don't have to use all the pedals. A lot of people don't.
Yeah.
But something that you think could get people by financially. I mean, you go where you want. But if I'm talking like, if you had to recommend something to get someone started right now and to get them to making professional recordings and things they think that you would call of a standard, what guitar, amp, and 3 pedals do you think you would recommend?
Yeah, okay, that's pretty easy for my kind of style of music. I think if you can get yourself a used 5150, probably the 2 or the plus, the 6505 plus, because that has the kind of clean channel on it as well.
Yeah.
You can pick those up on Facebook Marketplace for like 450 pounds now. Amazing sounding amps. You're never going to need anything else. The most typical thing that happens in our genre too is that people use a boost pedal in front of their amps. They use something like a tube screamer, which just cuts loads of top and bottom end out and just makes it really mid focus, so your sound's really tight. And so even just like an Ibanez TS9, it doesn't need to be some super boutique tube screamer clone kind of thing. Just even like the mini tube screamer TS9 or some cheap
they're
clone.
really great. Yeah.
Probably want a noise gate.
Okay.
The MXR Smart Gate's really good for that. Just really difficult to get wrong. And you probably don't even need a third pedal, mate. I don't know. Maybe like a compressor pedal for the cleans, because it's not the most inspiring clean sound in the world. It's not bad on those amps, but the compressor definitely would go a long way. And then guitar, I'd say any guitar with a bridge humbucker, preferably something like most guitars, if they've got a Seymour Duncan pickups like a JB, I think a JB is a very hard pickup to go wrong with for this kind of music, or a guitar that has the original AMGs like EMG 81 kind of thing. Although that's more of a metalcore sound than the
That's
modern.
like active versus passive, right? I don't know if all EMGs are active, but it's when I think EMG, I think active pickups. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I guess if you want that flavor, it's a lot tighter in the low end, and it's kind of a lot flatter through the rest of the range. So um, that's kind of the metalcore sound from the early 2000s, whereas most players these days tend to be using passives. I personally think that tunematic style bridges are probably the best sounding types.
Really, that's interesting. What
Yeah,
makes you
or stop
say
tails.
that? Just because of just because you've got a saddle for each thing intonating it, or because of how
No,
it's
it's to
bed
do with
down
the
to the bridge?
resonance. It's to do with the resonance, and I think it's to do with like when you have a Goto style bridge, the saddle's actually able to flex around a little bit. It's kind of it's just being held down by the tension of the string.
Right.
There's some kind of energy loss that happens there, and I've been studying that a lot recently. So put a tunematic bridge on a guitar, and you tend to get much better resonance of the note on the low string, which I prefer.
Mm.
I mean, I've got guitars that have fixed bridges on them, like kind of, I say Goto, I mean like a hardtail kind of style bridge. Um, and those can sound really good, but you compare like for like, as I've done quite a lot recently, and the low string won't have as much fullness. So that would be my suggestion. I don't know, something like a LTD Horizon series guitar. You can find those with like a tunematic bridge, and Seymour Duncan JB. You can get those 6 and 7 strings if you want to have a 7 string.
I'm almost a little bit gutted you said the 5150 because there was a cash converters by my house that had a 5150 combo, and I think it was like 250 quid. And I kind of
Great amp, but
have
they are so heavy.
I've heard, yeah. I carried an AC30 for years. That was my backbreaker. I got kicked out of many bands for that. But yeah, but I know like it's interesting to know because I've definitely seen them, and it's nice to know that they're stable and solid. That is a really,
Yeah. I mean, if it wasn't for metal, I probably wouldn't suggest that as like the first amp to go for. Something like a. I think Marshall Vintage Moderns are really underrepresented.
mm,
Like people don't know that those are really good amps. I think that Mesa Boogie Stiletto is another amp which sells for, compared to their retail value, they sell for like a third of their sale of the retail price, and they are amazing sounding amps that can cop everything from like really great kind of Marshall crunch to kind of bold, clean sounds, great breakup, and it's got loads of high gain tone as well. That's a real sleeper amp, I think, in today's climate.
yeah. Oh man, well, dude, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today. I really, really appreciate your time. I'm sure a lot of the people watching have appreciated having you on here as well. Guys, thank you for watching Year of No Gear. Again, if you've got any more questions for Adam or anything like that, and you'd like to know anything, just drop some comments, and I'm sure Adam will probably have a look and he may even answer them himself.
Sure, I can do that.
But yeah, this is so. Remember to check out the YouTube channel, A Year of No Gear on YouTube. This video will be up there live straight away. We can also listen back to some of our previous interviews with people like Leon Todd, Ryan Davey from last week, James Arbery from the comments. Quite a few people are up there. We're in the process of going on to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Don't worry, we're working on it. Unfortunately, all these things take time and require all this just pain, RSS feeds and all of this, but we're working through it. So that will be coming up soon, and I will let you know as soon as you can. If there's somebody that you would like on the podcast, or even if you'd like to come onto the podcast yourself, please do just email us at the Year of No Gear Facebook page, and we can follow on from there. But I just want to say once again, thanks so much, Adam, for coming on, and hopefully
Thanks, man. It was a lot of fun.
no, it was great. Like I said, maybe if you get more time, it'd be great to have you back. I would love to talk about all
Sure, no
sorts of
problem.
things. But yeah, right. Take it easy, guys. We'll see you later.